I will note that some of these studies may take significant time if they do not have the data available. And so obviously the nuance of these processes we'd be happy to work with the committee on, but we could envision something like that where it's working with the industry. At the very, very end of it, if we still don't have that data, we would have to say the data are inadequate. And the question is then, would we have the ability to say that because the data are not available to substantiate the safety, that ingredient needs to be removed from the market?
Thank you. I just want to close by saying that, again, many people think already that somebody's checking these things for them, and so we want to make sure that you. One of the things you said is that you, in addition to the authorities, you need the resources, and so as a follow up, we can hopefully figure out what specifically you mean by the resources that you need. So thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
It's called as much money as possible. The chair is delighted to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Main, for being here. I appreciate it very much. Let me ask you, for many years I was a practicing pharmacist and I owned my own business. And we sold many products. I was in somewhat of a rural area, so we had a lot of home remedies, if you will. And I'm just wondering what your intent is on how far you want to carry this. For instance, one of the things that we sold a lot of, just tons of, was soap made out of goat's milk. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about here, or is?
So I would say we would leave that to the committee to make those decisions about what would be incorporated from our perspective. Things like good manufacturing practices can apply.
Well, this was made in somebody's barn. I mean, it was.
Then one of the concerns we may have, and we have seen evidence, is whether it's made, in somebody's barn or somewhere else, it needs to be sanitary conditions. And we have had circumstances where we've had products manufactured in facilities with rodent, intrusion, rodent droppings.
Right.
We've had products that are contaminated.
Well, I mean, these were good practices, but it wasn't a manufacturing plant by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, we sold tons of it.
And I don't think any GMP would envision that it would need to be done in a manufacturing plant, but nonetheless, there are important sanitation considerations that we would hope all manufacturers would be utilizing already right now.
And see, that's one of the concerns that I've got. Now, granted, I was not here, and I'm not trying to compare apples and oranges here, but I want to go to the Drug Quality Security Act, because DQSA, again, granted, I was not here when it was passed, but I think that FDA has taken it to a level that the legislative intent was never intended for it to go to. So that's my concern here. And again, I know we're talking about drug quality as opposed to cosmetics, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance of cosmetics. I understand it and I get it, but at the same time, with DQSA, it's resulted in a number of patients not being able to get medications that they need as a result of what I think is the misinterpretation of the legislative intent of what DQSA was.
And I would say with regard to small businesses, small manufacturers, we are always open to flexibility for how we can take that into consideration. In the setting of good manufacturing practices, of course, there can be modified requirements for small businesses. But as I would indicate, probably most of these people are following GMPs today in terms of sanitation controls. But this is to make sure that all are doing that to protect consumers.
And we all want that, but what has resulted as in the case of DQSA is that patients aren't able to get some of the medications they need, some of the compounded medications they need, because of the interpretation of FDA of the rule. So that's my concern here. I just, we in the federal government don't have a tendency to overreact. We do overreact, and that's just my concern.
And I can't speak to the drug side of FDA because that's not where
I understand.
But we're happy to have folks come back and engage with you if you have questions about DQSA.
Okay, well, let me ask you something. I can understand when you're looking at ingredients that are used in these products, the immediate reaction to the product. But how do you ascertain the long-term effects of these products, and how are you going to be able to of these ingredients, and how are you going to be able to ascertain that in a short period of time?
The review of the data does not take that long. The question is the data itself. And in terms of how we review the long-term safety, we use the same scientific techniques and tools that are used across the agency. So we want to make sure, for example, that a compound doesn't cause genotoxic damage that might be indicating long-term carcinogenicity risk. So there are standard toxicity tests that can be looked at to predict long-term toxicity, not just the acute setting, which is where we currently have prioritized and focused our efforts.
Can you give me an example of one of the trends that you see now that concerns you in the way of cosmetics?
I think, as I said before, most cosmetics are safe, but we do see adverse events. We do see microbial contamination of cosmetics that are injected into the skin. We do see asbestos contamination. Asbestos is a known carcinogen. So there is no safe level of asbestos in talc products. So we do see these trends. We have been very public when we find that type of information. We've requested recalls and we notify consumers. But while the vast majority are safe, we're trying to protect against the adverse events that we do see.
One last question. I used the example earlier about the soap made out of goat's milk. Are you going to hold? Is it going to be FDA will be addressing the manufacturer, not the retailer who is selling it, or both?
So our authority would presumably be at the manufacturer level. The retailer may be distributing a product, and if we have to do a recall, then we may be invoking the retailers. But it's typically the manufacturer that is responsible for the safety of their product.
I understand, and I know I'm out of time, but I'm just very concerned about an overreaction here, and that we're going to be putting people out of business and getting people that are really depending on these products not being able to get them. So, thank you, Madam Chair. Now yield back.
The gentleman yields back.